Greetings and welcome to episode 8 of Sunday Design Rants with me, slicedlime. I am a game developer who has released 4 AAA games over the course of 10 years, and in this series I spend my Sundays analyzing game design decisions in different kinds of games. This time we're going to take a look at MMOs. Massively multiplayer online games have a certain allure for game publishers. Ever since World of Warcraft skyrocketed to previously unseen subscriber counts and became a seemingly endless money printing machine for Blizzard, there's been talk about who could make the WoW killer. But no WoW killer has appeared. The only game to come even remotely close to the phenomenon of longevity that is World of Warcraft is Minecraft, and that game has a relatively low price tag and no monthly subscription. Now, if you look at discussions surrounding these MMOs, that's where you will usually find the topics. Does it have a monthly subscription? Is it free to play? That kind of question occupies most of the talk around MMOs. All while World of Warcraft keeps ticking in money from millions of players every month. But what is the actual difference between World of Warcraft and all the aspiring WoW killers? Clearly, while there's something interesting to be said about free to play versus paid subscription or only upfront payment with microtransactions, something has to be different between the actual games for one to get such an incredible momentum, while others falter so quickly, fading out of public gaming memory. Something makes World of Warcraft a good enough game to make millions of players pay a fee every month to keep playing, while these other games aren't. I played World of Warcraft myself for a long time, perhaps spent more time on it than I'd care to sum up. For all the criticism against it, you have to concede that it is a very good game. I've also tried many of the contestants in the competition to topple WoW, and the only one that came really close was the most recent I tried, WildStar Online. It was good enough, in fact, to make me face the fact that my life has changed and there isn't enough spare time anymore to spend on a game like an MMO. Even still, WildStar and the other games like it all have some obvious flaws to me in terms of their design. Perhaps unsurprisingly, much of the problematic design I've seen in these games have been things that the developers have lifted as highlights of the game. Perhaps it's natural that some changes made to avoid criticism of being just a WoW clone are also sometimes the reasons that those games aren't as good as WoW. Let's take a first example in Star Wars: The Old Republic. Now, before we get into that, and in the interest of full disclosure, do note that I do work for Electronic Arts, the publisher of that game. I've also worked closely with some of the developers of that game on other projects, and they're very talented and smart people. Do note, however, that this rant is based entirely on my experiences as a player of that game, not on any knowledge of how the game is actually built. Now, with that said, MMOs are social games. The whole point of them, their allure, is that you play them with your friends, and make new friends to play with as well. Much of my time in World of Warcraft would be spent on our Ventrilo VoIP server talking to my friends while we played. Much of the time we weren't even playing together, but the common setting of the game pulled us together, and the guild provided the framework for a constant online friendship. Now look at Star Wars: The Old Republic. It is a rare occurrence of something that fails, in my view, because it is too good at something. The game is presented as an MMORPG with BioWare's trademark single-player style storytelling. It sports a conversation system where your character has meaningful choices through dialogue, and all this content is voiced. That is an incredibly large undertaking, and at first that sounded absolutely amazing. The result is really good too, but remember how I talked about MMOs being social games? I'm sorry, but my brain can only cope with one conversation at a time, and in Star Wars: The Old Republic, that conversation slot is now claimed by the game, which means that our Ventrilo VoIP server was either left empty or suffered from a very strange problem as members of the conversation suddenly muted the chat in order to listen to an in-game conversation instead. That way, by being too good at providing your character with voiced conversations, Star Wars: The Old Republic somehow became something in between a single-player game and a massively multiplayer online game. And as is usually the case, it got the drawbacks of both. For me, the grind of leveling in an MMO only works because I can do it while chatting to my friends. For an MMO, The Old Republic was too engaging, which is a strange thing to say about a game. It tried to be something more than an MMORPG, and because of that it became a lesser MMORPG. Let's move on to looking at another aspect of the design of these games, which is the very basis of player agency, how to interact with the game. In MMOs, this tends to take its shape through abilities on a hotbar, so that's where we're kicking off. Looking back at my interface in World of Warcraft, it's clear that it looked nothing like the default World of Warcraft interface, thanks to a plethora of add-ons. The other thing that is clear is that the way the hotbars are laid out and what's in them is uniquely tailored to the role of my character and my own role as a guildmaster and raid leader. It is clear from just looking at this interface that a great deal of player choice goes into the specialization of a character and into the way those abilities are used, not only in terms of talent trees and gear, but also in terms of something as mundane as which abilities are in which places on the hotbars, which ones are keybound to what, and even which ones are there at all. We're going to use 3 other games as case studies here, the aforementioned WildStar Online and Star Wars The Old Republic, and also Guild Wars 2. The immediate thing to note with these 3 is that none of them handle at all like World of Warcraft in this very basic design of hotbars and abilities. Star Wars The Old Republic is the most like World of Warcraft in that it has a ton of abilities and hotbar slots, but where World of Warcraft's customizable add-ons provided a richness of choice, the Old Republic's static UI has exactly enough hotbar slots to fit all of a character's abilities at max level. Because there were so many abilities, there weren't much of a choice. Lots of these abilities were only usable in special cases, so as a character leveled up, you were more and more cognitively challenged to keep track of what could be used and when. Guild Wars 2 has an interesting system in which your abilities are tied to your current weapon. So if you pick up a dagger, you'll get a certain set of abilities, if you pick up a sword, you'll get another. We're talking only a handful of abilities here. And since you can't switch weapons mid-combat, this means that you'd fairly quickly find a favorite weapon and ability set and then stick with it. Which also then meant that after only a few levels, your character's playstyle would stop evolving. Our third example, WildStar Online, has a sort of hybrid approach of these two. While you'd unlock lots of abilities for your characters just like World of Warcraft or Star Wars The Old Republic, WildStar Online sports a limited action set, which is just a fancy way of saying very few ability slots. By choice, the developers at Carbine Studios imposed a strict limit on the number of hotbar slots. While this was supposed to foster the kind of player choice that you'd see in World of Warcraft, and while WildStar Online also featured something like the add-ons you'd see in World of Warcraft, I came away feeling more restricted than anything else. In WildStar Online, you choose which of your abilities to include at all, where in World of Warcraft you'd choose which of your abilities to prioritize. That distinction means that in WildStar you're simply out of luck if your limited action set was wrong when you entered combat. But in World of Warcraft you always had the ability to use the hard-to-reach ones, even if you realized mid-combat that you'd made a mistake. Worst case, you can even open your spellbook and click abilities from there. Incredibly inefficient, but if you'd made a mistake, that was a way out. And yes, that happened, even in our endgame raids once or twice. I believe that the inability of these games to get the dynamic feeling of the actions available to the player and the way to interact with them to be a large contributing factor in their failure to make much of an advance on the popularity of World of Warcraft. The last factor I'm going to mention is one that is close to heart for me personally. It's what I work with, a field called technical design, and at the very heart of that is to ship a player experience that is excellent from a technical point of view. We're not talking execution here. Looking back to that time, World of Warcraft had a ton of issues and server problems at launch as well. We're talking the design of the game. So let's get technical for a while. Because MMOs are so large scale and their servers handle so many players at once, they use a technique called sharding and something called shards. Each shard is a separate server machine and does a part of the processing, and World of Warcraft is no different here than any of the other games that we're discussing. So where is the difference? The difference is in the technical excellence of World of Warcraft's player experience. We talked earlier about MMOs being social games. Well, the designers at Blizzard decided that it was an important part of the user experience that everyone on the same realm were always in the same shard whenever they were in the same space. They also decided that there would be no loading screens while you're just moving around in the world. What this means is that the game stops feeling like a bunch of separate servers and instead starts feeling like a big game world. This is the technical excellence as a game design criteria, one in which my friends are obviously in the same world as I am, because if I go to where they are, they'll always be right there. I won't have to teleport to another instance, join a group or anything else, they're just there, and that gives players the feeling that this is one big world rather than a bunch of servers. I am in the Barrens, not the Barrens Instance 4. The game will never ask me if I want to transport to my friend's shard because there's just one world. All of the other games we've discussed get this wrong to one degree or another. The technicalities of the implementation of a massively multiplayer server backend bleed through to the player, taking away part of the magic of what makes an MMO world a great online experience. We could speculate at length as to why these design choices were made. I suspect some of them were made in ignorance, some with the desire to make the game stand out. But this last one I think was just not seen as worth it. I'm sure the seamless and unified world of World of Warcraft was a very difficult challenge for the engineers at Blizzard to implement. But at some point, someone in charge decided that it was worth it, and I agree. So there you have it, 3 big reasons I think that there hasn't been a WoW killer MMO yet. If you have other ideas or other MMO stories to share, please write a comment on this video. This has been slicedlime, and this has been a Sunday Design Rant. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.